Welcome back, everyone. In today's guide, we're going to cover 3 very important concepts that Rekkles applies in his games for more consistent results that you need to start applying immediately. We could very easily say just get as good as Rekkles is at teamfighting and you'll be challenger in no time, but that's definitely not what makes him so consistent. It's always the little things that people tend to overlook, which makes him so dominating both in professional play and in solo queue alike. Let's get right into it with our first tip. But before introducing the concept, let's first add a bit of context to this game. Playing Tristana, he has a pretty decent lead over the enemy Jhin. It wasn't massive, but he did manage to get his Gale Force spike first, which allowed him to easily score a solo kill while the supports were away. Getting that kill helped him score the bot lane tower as well. Then, after taking that tower with his lead, he moves toward mid where he scored a kill on the enemy Yone. Yone was the enemy mid this game, which leaves the tower basically undefended. Rekkles proceeds to continue snowballing like crazy by taking yet another enemy structure. Okay, now that we've got a fair bit of context to how the game is going, we're going to see one of the things Rekkles does best in solo queue. After clearing mid, he heads toward Raptors. Clearing the camp, he has a very good base timing lined up. He has these items with this much gold. It's more than enough to buy Phantom Dancer, and getting your second item Spike as an ADC at 15 minutes is a dream scenario in most games. But Rekkles has eyes for a play that could earn him an even bigger lead. 3 enemy players all converged into bot lane to kill Ahri. What Rekkles is about to do is abuse a positional advantage over his opponents. Something that you constantly want to ask yourself is, where do your opponents want to go next while you're playing solo queue? Multiple people in one lane isn't very efficient. It's very likely that some of the enemies in bot are going to rotate toward mid lane, and this area is a perfect catching spot for a greedy rotation. Another rotation the enemy team might do is head toward Dragon. They just gotta pick, and even though they're behind, they may want to start the Dragon with a 5v4 advantage. Well, in that case, the enemy players in bot would likely path this way, leaving Rekkles and his Blitz to catch off the Elise rotating alone in either of these 2 ways. Let's see what actually happens. As we said, someone in bot was bound to come toward mid, giving Rekkles an easy pickoff. With a numbers advantage, they can now take the mid tower, and things begin to very quickly spiral out of control for the enemy team. It would have been a very easy, very natural decision to make to immediately base after taking the enemy Raptors. As we said, an early 2-item spike for any ADC is definitely something to play towards. But Rekkles knows that as an ADC, you've got to put in a bit more effort to consistently carry in solo queue. Positional advantages are one of the best ways of scoring leads in a game. You always want to be asking yourself these kinds of questions as you play. Number 1, where does my opponent want to go next? In this case, there's a big mid wave, so obviously the enemy ADC would want to go that way. Number 2, am I strong enough to block their path to that area? If you've got an item lead, then that should be an easy answer. And number 3, am I missing farm or risking something by committing time to blocking their path? For the sake of this example, let's say your Raptor camp is up and you could take it. You should always weigh what you're giving up versus what you're trying to zone your opponents from. Denying this giant wave at their tower would be worth more than taking a single Raptor camp in this instance, even if you didn't pick up any kills in the process. Alright, we'd love to keep talking about positional advantages, but let's move on to tip number 2 for now. In this game, we find Rekkles shoving in a final wave, prepping for a recall timing to pick up some items. As he does that, let's swap things over to the enemy ADC's POV. You see that as Rekkles was setting up a recall, his jungler decided to throw the game over a Gromp he had no right to steal. Like we always say, your jungler's throwing will never go away, even in Challenger Elo. This is a rather big problem, as Ezreal was already coming back to lane with a kill prior to that. With a 3-kill advantage, this lane is going to get rather tough for Rekkles when Ezreal bases to buy items. Disadvantages like these are inevitable in solo queue. But that doesn't mean that you can't find ways to try and even the odds as much as possible. You should always be thinking about what you can do based on the circumstances at hand. For starters, the enemy Ezreal hasn't based yet, which means that he's not nearly as strong as a 3-kill Ezreal should be since he hasn't bought any items. Punishing someone who hasn't spent their gold yet should be an obvious move to try and gain control back, and Rekkles does exactly that by harassing the Ezreal while Bard isn't in lane yet. Of course, this control won't last, as Ezreal has the wave advantage, and once Bard comes back, Rekkles is forced to play passively. If you know that your opponent has a gold advantage over you and will become much stronger once they base, then you need to counter that in some way by, at the very least, not giving your opponent a clean recall. Thus, we can see Rekkles making good use of Xayah's AoE to thin the wave as much as he possibly can before Ezreal can crash it into the tower. The end result is 2 enemy minions remaining alive outside of tower range, which is definitely not a clean crash. Now the real tip is what to do with these minions. What do you think Rekkles will try to do to come back in this lane? Some of you may be thinking of a freeze, but that's actually not a very good response to the current game state. Rekkles can force a freeze by walking forward, dragging these 2 minions along with him. By joining them up with the incoming red wave, he can definitely still force a freeze. A freeze is generally one of the best ideas to punish your opponent's poor recall timings, but when your opponent is really far ahead in terms of gold, it can easily backfire. Ezreal with his 3 kills would come back to lane with a massive item advantage. Once he's back, he can crash the freeze and then just perma-shove Rekkles into his tower. With his item and range advantage, the lane could very easily turn into a living nightmare very quickly. Rekkles knows this and wants to give himself the highest possibility to try and come back into the game. He left these 2 minions alive so that he can begin building a massive slow push. This is a very good tactic when you want to build the biggest wave that you can. You leave 2 to 3 enemy minions alive from the prior wave and allow your wave to crash into them here. Then you just slow push and last hit as late as you possibly can. The goal of this slow push is to guarantee a base timing once he has enough gold for an item. If he had enough gold here, he would have instantly crashed this wave into the enemy tower to get a base off, but he didn't have enough gold yet, so he continues slow pushing the wave. Thankfully, both junglers are bottom, so their presence is countered by one another, and Rekkles is able to continue pushing with this wave. Regardless of how behind he may be, slow pushing during the early game is almost always a surefire way of securing a crash, even at a big gold disadvantage. By planning ahead, he secured a recall timing during his own item spike to try and even out the odds as much as possible. Once he bases, he picks up a pickaxe and runs back to bot. When he gets back in lane, the enemy bard immediately engages onto him. Rekkles is able to easily outplay the 2v2 and come out on top. Now, don't get us wrong here. Rekkles isn't good enough to mind control the enemy Ezreal to E into a Xayah and Rakan. What he did do though is fully utilize the power of a slow push to help him even out the item disparity that all those kills gave Ezreal. When he got back to lane, their power levels were fairly similar, and all he had to do was wait for Ezreal to make a mistake. As we've seen, that will happen regardless of what elo you're playing in. Last but not least, our final tip is for an all too common mistake that we see from a ton of ADC players. Very often, we see ADCs waste so much time hitting enemy towers without gaining much in return. Like we say, consistency is the trademark of a great ADC player, and there's a very important tip that Rekkles follows when it comes to hitting towers. He almost never hits a tower unless he's guaranteed to take it in its entirety. The problem with hitting towers after turret plates have fallen is that they don't really give you anything unless you completely destroy it. Wasting time hitting a tower not only wastes your time for no gain, but also leaves you a bit vulnerable since you're having to overextend into enemy territory to hit it in the first place. Let's take a look at some examples to show you what kind of guidelines Rekkles follows before hitting a tower. Here we see him farming mid, while his team is getting into a skirmish in bot. Before rotating, he clears the wave and then heads on over to help finish off Rell with his Yone. As he goes back mid, remember that we saw Ryze, Hecarim, Jhin, and Rell die. Jace is also top lane, which means no one is going to be close enough to defend this tower. That's about as perfect as it gets to knowing when you can finish off an enemy tower. Let's compare that to a different situation moments later. As he rotates top lane to assist the Gragas killing Jace, Hecarim runs past to try and get there first. He fails, but the Hecarim does manage to escape to safety afterwards. In this case, after clearing the wave, Rekkles immediately bases and doesn't even consider hitting the top tower, which is a play that we'd see from a lot of ADCs playing on autopilot. It's easy to think that you have a huge numbers advantage up here, your team just want to fight, and there's not many people around. Pushing seems like second nature in this scenario. But consider the differences this time around from the previous example. First, Jhin is pushing waves in mid freely, which is a lot of farm being missed the longer Rekkles stays here. Second, there's also a ton of jungle camps available. It's likely Gragas won't take them all, so Rekkles getting to mid to have better access to those is important to accelerating his farm. And third, we saw Hecarim get away with quite a bit of health left and should still be in the area. The wave here is very frail, and Hecarim could very quickly kill it with his AoE. It's incredibly unlikely Rekkles does even half the turret's health, so it's completely pointless to stay here. It may not seem like all that big of a deal, but this is a major reason why some low elo ADCs sometimes struggle with their farm. Too much time wasted hitting towers that they won't take is time not spent farming to become a powerful ADC. Rekkles definitely knows better, which is yet another reason why he's almost always popping off in his games. Alright everyone, that's going to wrap up this guide. Remember that it's almost never about fancy team fighting to become a great ADC player. It's about the minor details that help you get farm leads and punish enemy macro mistakes that's always more important. By the way, you should know where these videos come from. Our hyper improvement platform, SkillCapped, is by far the best place to be if you want to actually improve at League of Legends. You can input your rank before signing up to see where we think you'll climb to. If you don't reach that rank while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a full refund. That's like a gym membership guaranteeing that you'll get ripped. We offer this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't, then you shouldn't pay for it. So be sure to check us out after this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.